According to the Mental Health Commission of Canada, mental illness affects approximately 1.2 million children across the country, making it imperative that we all work together to make sure that some deserving kids have the necessary resources in order to feel fully included in all aspects of societal life. Jan Stewart is a mother who lives with 2 kids with multiple mental health and complex disorders. She's a mental health governance expert and has extensive board experience in both Canada and the United States, including currently chairing Carrie's Place for Autism Services, the largest autism services provider in Canada. There is no doubt that Stewart is on a mission to inspire and empower parents with children with mental health disorders to persevere, have hope, and not to give up. That's precisely the reason she wrote her upcoming book, Hold On Tight, which is a brutally honest account where she holds nothing back, including the incredibly emotional journey and drain it takes on parents in the same situation. I was honored to have the privilege to sit down with Stewart to learn more about her journey. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I want to take the time to welcome you to the program, and I have to tell you that I'm super delighted and honored that you've carved out some time to engage in conversation with me all about the work you do to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion surrounding mental health. So with that, I'll welcome you to the program, and I'm so delighted to see you this morning.
Well, I feel the same way. I'm very excited, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. No, Jan, I know that you've been on the front lines with the mental health journey for a very long time. You've got 2 children that have some mental health disorders, but you're on a mission to make sure that they and other people in that same circumstance have access to full societal inclusion. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about all the great work that you do.
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to, Kevin. So first of all, I do have 2 wonderful children. There's Andrew, who has autism, Tourette syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, and learning disabilities, and his younger sister, Ainsley, who also has Tourette syndrome with mood and anxiety disorders, ADHD, and learning disability. So it's been quite a handful, to say the least. But as I write in my book, Hold On Tight, almost from the time they were born, we knew that something was wrong. In Andrew's case, his hands and his feet constantly moved in circular motions. He never talked to himself in his crib like other babies do or played, and he had no self-control or regulation when it came to eating. And every time I brought up a concern with our pediatrician, he said, Jan, calm down. Your children are fine. Stop being an overly vigilant triple type A mother. Unfortunately, this is fairly common, and he was wrong. And over the next several years, we had growing concerns. There was impulsivity, distractibility, anxiety. There were tics. Neither child could hold a pencil or a crayon. And when Andrew turned 9, his mental health disorders burst forward in full force. Seemingly out of nowhere, this loving, gentle boy started engaging in 2-hour screaming, terrifying rages, lashing out at anything and everything in his way. And we later found out, but of course we didn't know at the time, that this was associated with his Tourette syndrome. And within a month, he started engaging in non-stop rituals, like he couldn't walk through a door unless he gradually and slowly counted to 14, because his brain had terrifying, disturbing thoughts that his sister would be kidnapped unless he did that. And these bizarre rituals escalated very quickly. He started rubbing his head against shrubs. He even licked the filthy subway floor, if you can believe it. And then we saw more tics, more impulsivity. He lacked abstract thinking capabilities, had a lot of difficulty with change and maintaining eye contact. Ainsley came along, much easier as a baby and toddler. And we thought, for sure, we have some relief here. But when she hit kindergarten, the cracks began to show. Her behavior was out of control. She was disruptive. She jumped on desks. She shouted. She interrupted. She was constantly sent to the principal's office. And then came increasing fragility, paralyzing anxiety, with more learning disabilities tics. She misread social cues so that she couldn't understand what her friends were saying. And she sadly gradually lost every friend she had in the neighborhood. You can imagine what that did to her self-esteem. So both kids have really faced heartbreaking adversity, and they know that their up and down roller coaster cycles are going to continue. But with perseverance, grit, and determination that they have, there's hope. And what's wonderful is you can succeed if you just keep at it. And it's their stories combined with my work in governance that has propelled me forward.
Absolutely. Well, Jan, we share the same synergy because, one of the things that I live my life by is the saying that inclusion is the gateway to independence. So how do you think we can create an inclusive future for children with all types of disabilities?
It's a great question, Kevin, and I think it's a very important one. So to me, first of all, let's define inclusivity. Inclusivity means treating everyone fairly and equally, with dignity and respect. It doesn't mean treating everyone the same, but it means treating people and giving them equal access to services, opportunities, resources, right? So what do we need to do? Social connectivity is key. It helps battle feelings of isolation and embrace feelings of worth and belonging. We need to educate and spread facts about whether it's mental health or any other disability to fight stigma. We need to train more healthcare professionals, not only to deepen the pool, but to facilitate access, shorten wait times, and make the system easier to navigate. It's far too complicated today. Schools need better resources for early intervention, and the private sector has to shoulder a greater responsibility to hire and retain individuals with disabilities, whether it's mental or physical, to embrace truly inclusive workplaces. Governments, obviously, have a key role to play, not only in expanding anti-discrimination and anti-bullying laws and policies, but in improved access to healthcare and widened insurance coverage. We know in the case of people with mental health disorders, there's huge economic plight, and they need increased economic support, along with, as we all know, a greater investment in more affordable housing and childcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jan, I want to pick up on something you just said about more investment in healthcare professionals. One of the things that I see as an issue is also pay equality, right, for those that enter the field of supporting folks with disabilities. I know this because, as you know, I have cerebral palsy, and one of the things that, when you look for staff members, when you find a good one, you want to keep them, right? So
absolutely.
It's important for pay equality, too. Would you agree with that?
Totally. And I think you would probably agree with me, Kevin, from our different perspectives. that finding the right psychiatrist, psychologist, healthcare professionals, social workers is extremely difficult and complex. And it's important, and that's what I write about in my book, is how do you go about this? I give tips and advice to help people live more fulfilling lives for themselves and their children. And those tips, by the way, if you just go to my website at janstewartauthor.com, you can ask to sign up for my newsletter, and I'll be starting to send those out in the new year.
Well, fabulous, building a sense of community and support is so important in the work that you do. I don't have to tell you that, right?
Absolutely. And my governance work is so key in this regard. I call myself a hope ambassador. I see it as my calling. And I recognize that not every person or parent or anyone with a disability has the time, energy, or reserves to devote to board work. But it's so beneficial if you can, and uplifting to see the difference you can make in people's lives. My first advocacy work was way back with Andrew's psychiatrist at Sick Kids Hospital in downtown Toronto. He was working with a psychiatrist who specialized in his OCD, his obsessive compulsive disorder. And we co-founded the parent support group for OCD. And what was so important about that at the time, Kevin, was that I didn't know any other parent experiencing what we were. And forming this group allowed me to form connections of help and support. And from there, I was thrilled to be invited to join the board of CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which, as you know, is Canada's leading psychiatric hospital and a real global center of excellence. Did fascinating work there, everything from merging organizations together in mental health and addictions to recruiting, right before I left, the hospital's next CEO. And I've served on additional boards and advisory councils in both Canada and the US, but capped 4 years ago by joining Carey's Place Autism Services. Carey's Place is a wonderful organization. It's the largest autism services provider in Canada. It serves over 8,000 individuals with autism and their families throughout their whole lifespan, full suite of residential and community services, 1,200 staff, and I became its chair just last August.
Well, congratulations on that. As you were saying that, Jen, so I serve on the, one of the things that I do to give back to my local community is I serve on the Family Advisory Council for the John McGiffin Children's Center here in Windsor and Essex County. And
Fantastic.
Well, thank you. One of the parents on that committee with me, her name is Maria Sanders, and Maria has a daughter with autism, and one of the things that she advocates for in the work that we do on the committee is more awareness for the challenges, as you said earlier, about navigating the services when it comes to autism services. So from your unique perspective, I'm wondering the work that still needs to be done and making, first of all, securing the services easier and then navigating them once you get them, because I know it's not easy.
No, there is a crying need to expand and improve access to services in autism. First, let's go back, because some of your listeners may not know that autism is a neurological, developmental difference that affects the functioning of the brain. It's lifelong. There's no known cause. There's no known cure. Symptoms vary between individuals from mild to severe, and interestingly enough, within the same individual. And we have a saying that meeting one person with autism is meeting one person with autism, because they vary so much. But generally what you see are differences in social communication and repetitive and restrictive behaviors. The Public Health Agency of Canada a few years ago estimated that 1 in 66 children and youth under the age of 18 have autism. Think about that. The prevalence is huge. It's hundreds of thousands. Now, for children, our provincial government in Ontario has recently brought in the needs-based Ontario Autism Program to try to expedite services. But the sad reality is that the wait list for these kids is on average still over 1 year. And last year, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reported that 50,000 children are waiting for services. And then as your children age and become adults, there's a whole new set of challenges for autistic individuals. The waitlist for housing, supportive housing, is decades long. The poverty level for those with intellectual disabilities and autism is significantly higher than the general population. And the latest frontier, which is being looked at, is aging individuals, and they're massively underserved. I've experienced all these with my family at home, but rest assured that if there is hope, if you just keep at it, you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jen, I'm also curious to ask you about employment because, as you know, I served as the ambassador for the Discoverability Network, which is our province's new online job matching portal for folks with disabilities and employers to get connected. So talk to me about employment equality as well for folks with all types of disabilities and where you come down on that side of the fence as well.
Yes, inclusive workplaces really have to be customized. And to embrace inclusive workplaces, employers have a lot of work to do, and they can do it. Let me make this come alive with an example for you. My son has had 3 major employers. He's now grown. His first employer, he was a cashier at a grocery store, and it was wonderful. He is very gifted with customer service, and he did very well for 7 years. But at one point, the grocery store tried to pull him off cash and hide him in the back because he, quote, looked disabled. Of course, I became irate, sent a scathing letter to their head office, and he was immediately put back on cash. But trust had been broken, and that's not being an inclusive workplace. His next workplace was with a very well-known Toronto-based organization that really wanted him, but didn't know what to do with him. And they gave him about an hour of work a day, and then they told him to go watch TV. Well, that's not meaningful work. It's not treating him as productive or equal. It's true for anyone with a disability, no matter what. His current employer is vastly different. He's been with Rogers Communications, the leading Canadian telecom company, for about 4 years now. And they've been a role model of inclusion and diversity, while his previous employers were well-meaning. Rogers has put that well-meaning into action. So what do I mean by that? 1, they treat me, and I'm Andrew's legal guardian because he can't make decisions that are meaningful by himself. He doesn't have that ability. So they treat me as a true partner. They share their thinking with me, they listen to my advice, and they respect what I have to say. 2, they brought in a job coach, both to help them and Andrew, particularly at the beginning with integration, but on an ongoing basis. Andrew and the company meets with them monthly or more if needed. They brought in customized accommodations, and this is key, the word customized. In Andrew's case, for example, because of his ADHD and impulsivity, he needs to have his work chunked in smaller, meaningful pieces because change is very difficult for him. He can't work shift work like a number of his other colleagues, so they've set his hours every day. They have a special mentor whenever he needs it. Another thing they've done is anytime there's a minor issue, they contact me so that if he's, let's say, distracted at work, they can reach out to me and we can deal with it before it bubbles up and mushrooms. There's so much help and hope out there, but a corporation or organization has to not only have the will, but has to execute.
Execution is the key, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just before I ask you about your book, I have a bit of a selfish question. Well, I shouldn't say a bit of a self-serving question. So I am going to, in the new year, I'm going to address the Chief Diversity Officer and his staff of Westland, Michigan, who runs their government local response to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm wondering if you could just generally tell me the role you think government governments at all levels, but especially the local level, have to sort of develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative.
Yes, and congratulations. That's exciting.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's exciting, isn't it?
Absolutely. All levels of government have to participate. And it has to come from the top. It's one thing to have a little island within the government believe in something, but unless it's gospel and it's spread, it doesn't work. You have to, just like with everything else, you have to live and walk the talk. And that's the key. And in my book, I do talk about these contrasts that I talked about in Andrew's Employers. The government has been involved in an indirect way, but in an exciting way. I don't know if you know the organization Ready, Willing, and Able.
I do, yes.
But they're a fantastic national program that's funded by the Government of Canada, and it's a partnership between the government and different autism and intellectual disabilities communities. And they're hired by companies, and they help companies hire and retain, the key word is retain as well, individuals with, in their case, intellectual disabilities and autism. It's that kind of program that is so meaningful and needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the reasons I know you wrote your book, Hold On Tight, was because you wanted to provide, and you're on mission to provide hope and inspiration to those families and parents and children that are going through a similar circumstances as yours. And I know that it's a raw account of all of the emotional journeys that you've gone through throughout the years. So I'm fabulous. I'm wondering if I can ask you about your book and the process about writing it and how cathartic that was for you.
Absolutely. Of course, I'm excited about the book, which is going to come out on March 8th. So it's already on pre-order on Indigo, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. So I'm excited. But when I started the research for Hold On Tight, and I talked to a number of psychiatrists in both Canada and the US, I was really surprised that relatively little has been written about raising children with mental health disorders from the parental perspective. And I'm proud that my book fills that void. On the one hand, I want parents to really understand the true reality of their situation, unsugar-coated. And I'm brutally honest and hold nothing back. You know, when Andrew was going through those terrible rituals and rages I discussed before, he told us at one point that he felt he was going crazy and wanted to die, and I just froze inside. And one day, Ainsley left me a note on my bed saying, I know I'm a bad kid and I'm out of control, but I can't help it because of the chaos at home. And I just died inside. And the worst night probably happened one cold, snowy February evening. The kids had had a good day. And when David and I, my husband and I, got home from work, we thought we'd be safe to pop over to a neighbor's 2 houses down just for 10, 15 minutes max. And when we got back, we walked into our back garden and found Ainsley sobbing uncontrollably, shivering in the snow barefoot with just her nightgown on. She was terrified of her brother's rage that had started shortly after we left. And I remember thinking, Kevin, that I was living in a home with an abuser. And that abuser was not my son. It was his mental health disorders. But equally important, I want parents to know they need to celebrate their children's successes. You know, Andrew has this wonderful job at Rogers, gets himself to and from work, and he has a charm that's infectious. Ainsley is a gifted child and youth counselor. She works with a grade 1 autism classroom this year. And I'm convinced that it's her own lived experiences and her knowledge, deep intrinsic knowledge of Andrew, that's made her such a valuable resource. And this is what I bring together in my book with advice for parents, such as trust your gut as a parent, reset the expectations for your life and of the support you can expect to receive from family and friends, talk openly with your children. There are a number of others. And again, if listeners go to my website and ask for the newsletter, I'm happy to share those.
Absolutely. And Jared, as you know, family stress is a big issue when you're dealing with this type of a situation because oftentimes they're high leverage. So I'm fascinated to get your perspective on how you effectively deal with family stress when you're in this type of a situation and the importance of sort of what I call finding your inner center, really reconnecting with your own individual self, or with your partners as well as you go through this process.
Kevin, this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I was so delighted when the well-known Canadian psychiatrist Peter Tsatmari, who works at both Sick Kids Hospital and CAMH in Toronto, he agreed to write the foreword to my book. And the foreword is extremely compelling. And I want to quote one sentence that he said. He says, quote, "The patient is, in fact, the whole family." We know that children's mental health disorders play havoc with marriages and partnerships. You know, the strain and stress can be absolutely debilitating. But true partnership means working together in the best interests of the child, participating both equally in care, and giving each other needed emotional support. It requires trust and giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Now, my husband David and I are still married and we've survived as a couple, but many others don't. We've heard parents blame one another, make accusations, undermine their disagreements about everything, particularly about medications. You know, one parent may say, "I don't believe in medications. I don't think my child needs them," or they might be afraid that their child's going to become a zombie. And these stresses can separate and divide spouses and heighten the risk of divorce, which of course makes things worse. Now, David and I have not been immune from these challenges. There are so many times when the children's care is so consuming that we have no time for each other, much less ourselves. But the key is that we lean on one another and we trust one another. We even joke about the genesis of the kids' disorders. You know, David has a restless leg. And so I'll point to him and say, "Aha, ADHD." And he'll point back at me because I'm a perfectionist and he'll say, "Aha, OCD." But the key is it doesn't matter where these disorders come from a family perspective. What matters is that we act harmoniously in the best interest and try to carve out satisfying lives as spouses. Perseverance really works. You have to stick with it. And finally, don't forget about siblings. I just talked a few minutes ago about how Ainsley was so terrified about her brother's rages. And it was easy to relegate her to the background because he was so demanding. But every child needs and deserves equal care. We quickly, fortunately, recognized this, remedied it, spent a lot of time doing simple activities with her together, baking, skating, playing board games like Candyland, that she liked. That's key, that she enjoyed. But most importantly, we sat down with her and we explained what was going on with Andrew and his disorders.
Communication is key, isn't it?
Good parenting is all about good communication.
Absolutely. And, you know, Jack, people often ask me why I'm so an inspirational or a forward-thinking person. And, you know, I always tell them I'm simply living my life. And if I'm an inspiration to others, that's fine. Fine, and I'll take that mantle. But I also say that the only level of expectations I have to meet are my own. Because if you don't have your own level of expectations, it's hard to reach anyone else's level of expectations, right? Right. So my question is, how do you reset the expectations for your children? Because I also tell people that there's no 50% off policy when you have a disability, right? You can't take it back to a department store. So talk to me about resetting expectations for your child. And as you said earlier, really celebrating the wins as well.
It's an excellent question. In the case of children's mental health disorders, they throw every family member's life into disarray. And I've experienced this. There's going to be fear, anger, and resentment at times, and that's okay. But what's key is accepting that your life may not be as hoped for or planned for in order to move forward. I describe in my book that David and I started our lives with rose-colored glasses on and dreams and hopes of happy, successful children. Who doesn't? But our reality couldn't have been more different. We were terrified of Andrew's rages and rituals. I was so drained by the constant calls from the principal at Ainsley School. And then relationship with family and friends are affected. Unfortunately, and it's true of all disabilities, but probably particularly with mental health disabilities and disorders, a lack of education leads to fear, misunderstandings, and stigma. My family was very well-meaning, and my mother, who was my closest confidant and support in the whole world, actually said to me one day, "Jan, you just need to be a stricter parent, and Ainsley's unruly behavior will disappear." I don't think so, Mom. We've seen parents say their families aren't interested, they're afraid, it's too complex, and the worst are terrible erroneous impressions that some family members may have. I've heard, a child is morally deficient, or even a stain on the family name, if you can believe it. I mean, how would you react if a family member said that to you? Think about it. And then there are friends. Some friends will distance themselves, and that's hurtful. But in my case, it was compounded by the fact that I was so consumed by the children's care that I didn't have time to invest in developing and maintaining friendships. But fortunately, other parents of special needs kids really formed a community with us. We helped each other, embraced each other. We even joked about things that other families may not find so funny, like Ainsley's rude swearing at teachers when she didn't feel supported. But they really helped us understand the reality of our situation and propelled me to persevere and have hope.
Having hope is half the battle, isn't it?
That's the key.
Jana, I'm inspired to share just this one personal story about myself and my family. So I'll actually share two stories. So I actually found out when I was 9 years old that I would not be able to walk normally because of the severity of my cerebral palsy. And I remember it because I really believe this was the turning point in my life. So all of my procedures for my disability were performed at Times Valley Children's Hospital in London. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with the hospital.
Great hospital.
Yeah, so at the end of my last surgery, when I had recovered and I was discharged from the hospital, my parents and I were escorted to a hospital conference room, and Dr. Tim Carey looked at my parents and myself, and he said, "Kevin's last surgery was successful, but there'll be no more medical procedures performed because we believe we've done everything that we can and to help your child from a medical perspective." And he looked at my parents and he said, "Your child won't be able to walk." And he went through all of the ways that this was going to affect my life. And the next day, I had to go back to school, and I was 9 years old at the time and in fourth grade. And I didn't know this at the time, but I really think what happened next to me really changed my life. So I was then, when I got back to school the next day, I had a scheduled meeting with the principal at the time, Dr. Carol Crowley, and she had everyone, including my parents, in her office that was assigned to my file, from social workers to teachers to therapists. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and she made a space in her office for my wheelchair at the center of the room. And she said, "The only limitations on your life are the artificial ones that you place on yourself personally." I really think that was the turning point in my life. And the second story that I wanted to share with you is that I also have an identical twin brother. And Keith and I were both born with cerebral palsy.
Ah.
My brother grew out of his cerebral palsy when we were 4 months old,
Hmm.
and it still affects things like his handwriting and range of motion at times. But my brother is now an assistant professor of sports psychology at Missouri State University. So that's a long way of asking you about the importance of teamwork and really partnership, because my parents' philosophy in dealing with my disability, and I'm 33 now, but my parents' philosophy in dealing with my disability is that we're all on the same team. So I'm fascinated to ask you about the importance of teamwork and partnership when you have a child with a disability.
What you just said, A, is so inspirational and wonderful, but also there's so many parallels with our family's life. I mean, to me, first of all, partnership and teamwork mean everything. And as I discuss in my book, Andrew and Ainsley have benefited from partnership and teamwork in spades. In Andrew's case, his psychiatrist and his psychologist have always regularly communicated with one another so that they can adjust approaches to medications and therapy. In Ainsley's case, her schools always, and I mean on a monthly basis, met with us, as yours did, with the principal, her teachers, her external psychologist, and us, so that we could adjust course. Didn't always work, and she would have undoubtedly been thrown out of numerous classrooms otherwise. But that's what was so key about it. And of course, this partnership that you talk about extends into adulthood as your children grow. I talked about the contrast easily earlier between Andrew's previous employers and Roger's, his current employer, and you see how they treat me and him as a true partner. Again, there's that hope and help out there if we just keep at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I ask you my final question, you've inspired me to ask this question because it's something that I'm personally passionate about. Once a child with a disability turns 18 and they still live at home and they're used to all of these wonderful services that they get when they're until the age of majority. And it's one of the reasons that I help establish at our local children's treatment center a transition to adulthood program after these children are discharged from, in my case, it's the John McGifford Children's Center. I wanted a space where parents could go once they're discharged from the center, because as you know, after those services are deleted from your life, you have to pay for them out of pocket if you don't have the appropriate level of insurance. So talk to me about the importance of transitioning to adulthood as well, because it's very critically important, isn't it?
It's absolutely critically important. I mean, the true fact is that every stage is critically important, but you're right. There is a drop off in services. Once, there's an emotional connection to children. And so governments and society look at children, and that's the first place that services are sent to and are badly needed, as you've heard. Once you transition to adulthood, there are an increasing number of programs. There's no question about that. And at Carrie's place, we're really paying attention to young adults now. We have an autism advisory committee made of young adults, including Andrew, and a number of other initiatives. There's peer support. What about dating? There are all kinds of things that you have to look at on top of employment. Some of the other things you have to look at, housing. I said earlier that the wait list for supportive housing is decades long for those with the mental health disabilities. Guardianship. Some children that grow into adults will need legal guardianship, such as Andrew. My daughter Ainsley doesn't need it. And that's a very onerous process and complicated to figure out. But there is help and hope when you reach out to parents with me. And again, those tips are in my book. So when it comes out, read it, take a look at the newsletter, and I'm here for you to give hope and help and tell you to persevere.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jan, my final question is the way that I end every podcast, and it's this. I'm curious for you, when you look at your personal and professional legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
As I said earlier, I'm a hope ambassador, and I'd like to be known as someone who had a positive impact on the lives of others, who helped ease distress and anguish, and who really gave people the inspiration and empowerment to persevere through the most difficult of times, to have hope and to hold on tight.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jan, finally tell me, if people want to get connected with the great work that you do, or yourself personally, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, there are several ways. Again, my website is janstewartauthor.com. Again, the book is called Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness. Here, I'll show it to you. It's right here, coming out March 8th. It is up for pre-order on Amazon, Indigo, and Barnes & Noble. I also am on Facebook and Instagram at Jan Stewart Author, and I post every day. And my email, should you wish to reach out, is hello@janstewartauthor.com.
Well, fabulous, Jan. I really want to extend a thank you to you, not only for joining me in conversation and engaging in that this morning, but also as an ambassador of friendship, and I look forward to our continual conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I really want to thank you for the good work that you do and for joining me this morning. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Well, Kevin, you're an equal inspiration to me, so it's a mutual admiration society, and thank you so much for having me on.